papers that I'm going to read off of because I'm like really wicked tired, as I'll get into in a second. But first, like, thank you for having me here. Like, it's really an honor and a privilege to be here because I see this convening as a really historic and a really hopeful moment for the Cooperative Union. Cooperative, kind of in the context of a lot of youth and student organizing that's been happening in the past few years since the International Year. So that's really awesome to be here. Like, I'm super, super stoked. But I am also really, really tired and a little bit delusional because getting here was really hard. I had my flights canceled 4 times, and I've spent the last 40 hours of the last 4 days either in an airplane or in an airport. And I only got here about 2 hours ago. And part of my journey involved running a kilometer in negative 40 degrees Celsius to catch a train to the airport. It's really bad. It's in Minnesota, where I'm from. We talk about, like, if it's so cold, like, if you walk, you die, so you have to run. It's running weather. It's so cold. And negative 40 is where, like, Celsius and Fahrenheit are the same. So that just kind of blows your mind a little bit. But yeah, no, it was, let me see where I'm at. Okay. It was super hard to get here. But, like, I'm really, really, really glad that I'm here. And I'm really glad I persevered. And I'm going to need your help a little bit in going through the next, like, hopefully just 20 to 25 minutes. That's what I'm intending on. So if you can help me keep me on task if you need questions and you want to react, please do. You know, a little energy volleying would be really helpful and good. But is everybody comfortable to sit where they are for like 20 minutes or something? Okay. Are you okay? Oh, okay. I thought you were saying, yeah. But anyway, kind of as in contrast to like being in this place, where I was right before I came here, and which complicated my whole journey here, is that I was actually in the southern part of the U.S. attending the annual conference and meeting for the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. So these are like, most of these folks are the top co-ops in the United States, like the top 100. Top meaning having the most assets. So my definition of top might be a little bit different. Your definition of top might be a little different. But these are the biggest financial-wise co-ops in the U.S. I was the only person under the age of 30 there, for sure, and I was probably the one with the most radical politics. So in some ways it was really surreal, but I was there doing work about this redistribution that I'll get at in a little bit to build up like the more radical youth work that that we're trying to do in the U.S. and like what you're trying to do here. But all in all, I'm super. Oh, the one thing I also want to say too. Like these co-ops are so huge. Like they write on their financial statements in like single and double digits, and then there's a little asterisk that's like amounts are in billions. Like that's the kind of co-op that we're talking about, and you have some of those here, so you know what I'm talking about. So it's a little bit surreal to go from there to here, but the food's better here. So I think that should be mentioned. Yeah, they have. Okay, but so yeah, but so there's also a parallel in this story of like getting here. Is the journey for me in my cooperative work as a young person trying to find a place and work and engagement in the cooperative movement in the U.S. Similarly hairy, and had a number of also kind of canceled flights or false starts, if you will. And so what I want to talk today with you about is I want to tell you kind of my co-op story, so what it's like to be a young person in the cooperative movement in the U.S., and what work we're doing, and then talk about kind of the strategies that folks in the U.S. and myself, through our experience, have kind of thought about as like, this is the way to build federations, to build movement infrastructure for young people in the cooperative movement. So I'll go through kind of those 5 things and we'll tie it up. But if I start to get a bit boring, particularly when I'm talking about my co-op story, like maybe like hand signal or something, or I know some people do this or this. Like, that's fine. I'll like cut that part short and move on. So, because I don't want to get anybody disengaged. But yeah, so I'm going to start with my co-op story. It started about 8 years ago when I was 19. I just turned 28, so I'm starting to feel old, but I'm still a youth in the context of our work. So about 8 years ago when I was in second year in university at a 4-year college in the U.S., and considering how under the radar co-ops are in the U.S. and how there is actually no formal cooperative education program in higher education anywhere in the United States, I'm actually really surprised that I found out about cooperatives. But how I did so is I was taking an economics class, and the instructor pretty clearly was pushing a neoliberal capitalist agenda. And we'd have a chapter for class, maybe like 12 pages. He'd be read pages 2 through 3, 5, 6, and then half of 8. And so I kind of sensed there's probably stuff going on in those other pages that maybe didn't fit into his narrative that he was presenting to the class. So I was in the practice of in class, like reading those unassigned portions. Sure enough, one day I came across 2 paragraphs that talked about the cooperative model, not the movement, cooperative business model, and I like flipped out. And that has changed my life. That is like the pivotal moment in my life in terms of the work and meaning that I find in cooperation. But so my immediate thought was like, why don't we do this for everything all the time? So my immediate response to that was trying to start to do it with everything all the time. So I was currently a pretty active student activist in a number of spaces, like food justice, housing rights, all this kind of jazz. So I started trying to like apply the cooperative model to all of these activism things that I was doing, and it resulted in like a lot of failures. 3 failures to be exact, and 1 success. But so the first failure was that we were thinking about, hey, let's get an extension of our local food cooperative, have them distributing like beverages and whatnot on campus. And our only obstacle was this exclusivity contract with Coca-Cola on the campus. Do you folks have these things? Yeah. So it was $15 million at the time, and we were like, yes, it's up for renewal and renegotiation. Like, we're going to do a bunch of actions. We dropped banners, did a bunch of other stuff, and the end result was that some students got expelled, and the contract was renewed at a higher level. So that was fail number 1. Number 2 was like, okay, let's create a used book and like school bookstore cooperative on campus for students, staff, and faculty so they could come in and trade in their textbooks, all that kind of jazz. So to kind of, and a lot of this was in response to that our privately owned bookstores on campus had just been bought out by Barnes & Noble, which is a large book chain in the U.S. Is it over here too? Okay, well, anyway. Just like the Walmart of bookstores. Okay. I've seen them.
They might even be owned by Wilson.
Yeah, seriously. Quite seriously. But so we, to kind of rally and for like interest around it, we're like, let's have a textbook swap at the end of fall semester. People can come get the books they're done with, the people who are taking the same class in the spring semester. Simple enough. We want to do an on-campus room. But seriously, we could not get a room rented to us. Like, nobody would do it. And finally, we had a personal connection in the library staff, and she kind of under the radar just got a room for us and didn't send it up through the formal like room filing application process. She was then directly contacted by administrators that were like, we're shutting this down. This is not happening. And so there was something about like either a cease and desist letter from Barnes & Noble was threatened or it was sent to somebody. I now don't remember, but yeah, that didn't go any deeper or any farther. So the third failure is actually the beginning of a success. So the story does get a little bit better. So we started thinking about housing. Started to create a student housing cooperative. And we were like, okay, this is going to add value to student life, add value to the entire university, provide low-income housing or affordable housing for students. Like, the university's definitely going to want to partner with us. So we went to the property owning department of the university that actually owns a lot of residential property on and off campus and leases it just like a regular landlord. We're like, they're for sure going to give us a deal because like we're on their team. They would not give us a deal. We toured many properties and had many, many meetings, met with deans, what have you, made PowerPoint presentations, the whole 9 yards. And ultimately, we found that conventional landlords off campus were giving us a better deal. So we stepped off campus, started looking for property there, and changed our tune and said we're going to be a student-community hybrid. And we're going to have a mixture of students and non-students in our house because we didn't want to create any more student-specific spaces outside of the campus because there was already enough of that in town and there was already enough really exclusive university space and activity that the town wasn't involved in.
Which university is it? University in Minnesota and Minneapolis? Or?
This is Indiana University, which is like, it's Bloomington.
Yeah.
So, cool. Yeah, there's a lot of good coaches. But yeah, so in in Bloomington, we went off campus, and I trust it probably exists here. We have this thing called the Town Gown Gap, or the campus community, yeah. So we were like, okay, we're gonna see the work we're doing is like in service of bridging the Town Gown Gap. And I think we did, like we succeeded. We leased 2 houses, had 8 members across 2 houses, so we were pretty small. But today, like a little bit over 7 years after we initially incorporated, own a $1.5 million property and have like several other properties that are leased, and now the co-op is like 5 times the size that it originally was. So it's definitely, there's an asset to the community. It's something that has student representation and voice that the community members can access, because sometimes you look at the huge behemoth of a large university on your campus, you don't know how to interact with it, or like how to talk to it, and how to get a feel for the people, for what the people who are actually in it really want. So yeah, that was really wonderful, and that kind of set me on my way, but very literally and figuratively, because it took so long to get all of that started, that I only got to live in the housing co-op for like 3 months before I left. So I went on to work as executive director of a system of housing cooperatives specifically for students in California. That was like the hardest job ever. Like it was harder than starting a co-op, because I was 23 at the time, and I was in charge of like 6 dozen people in their houses, and so I had this responsibility and this authority and like a great deal of power, but I also had this responsibility to educate and engage all of the members so they could be my boss, because they own the co-op, right? They're my boss, but I had to educate them in order for them to know to step into the role of being boss, because for most people, entering in this co-op space for the first time was totally foreign. That it's just not something or a structure that was talked about or that's known. So it was really weird. And as a 23-year-old, most of these people were my same age or older than me. So like they were my peers, but I had this weird authority, but they were also my boss, but I also had all of the information and other things that create power. And it was probably one of the most challenging and complex spaces to navigate. And I made a lot of missteps, for sure, but I also learned so incredibly much, and it was really the first time in my life up until that point that I had been faced with that kind of challenge to thinking about power and thinking about being effective and thinking about engagement and inclusivity and how to make greater collective impact collectively. And there was, no other option or job that was really going to give me that. So that was just really wonderful, but really, really hard. In contrast, at the same time while I was staff there, I was on the board for a subset of NASCO, which is called NASCO Development Services. And it is an organization that oversees the delivery of technical assistance for developing housing co-ops. So you help people start their co-ops.
What's NASCO?
Oh, NASCO? Do people know what NASCO is?
No.
Okay, so I won't get into the structure right now because it's super confusing. But NASCO is a family of organizations, and the acronym is North American Students of Cooperation. And it is, number one, an education and a membership association of housing cooperatives that use a very particular equity model. So it's called the common equity, the group equity, or the zero equity model. It's where the co-op owns the property, so when people leave, they don't take financial wealth with them, but how we talk about the model is that they do gain and build equity, but of the non-financial type, and they take it with them when they leave. So I don't like the term zero equity because I think it's a misnomer. Group equity, I think there's definitely individual earning that takes place, so common equity is kind of the notion because you have the common kinds of equity that you take with you when you go. But NASCO is a family of organizations, and one of those organizations is NASCO Development Services, and they help people start co-ops. But that board is comprised of staff people, like myself at the time, of these larger co-op systems that already exist, except I was the youngest person on the board by 20 years or more, and I was also one of only two women on like a 12-member or so board. So the power dynamics and the stuff that I was encountering there was incredibly different from what I was dealing with back at home in my work. And I also found it really hard to relate to my other board members because they often demonstrated what I interpreted to be kind of this sense of paternalism towards their membership. And that was really trying for me. And even if I didn't necessarily think they were being super paternalistic, like it was really clear that those other folks were not really challenging and dealing with the power dynamics and trying to radically redefine authority in the ways that I was engaging with the whole structure and the system. But at the same time, I know that each and every one of these people were not doing what they were doing for the money, and they really felt passionate about their work and that they cared for their membership. But at the end of the day, what it kind of demonstrated to me is that having adults manage spaces that youth are supposed to own and control truly, like, just doesn't work. I mean, I think as somebody who's an age peer, I can also be paternalistic and othering for sure, but I think it is way less likely that an age peer is going to be othering and distancing. And I also think that a group of peers is much more likely to hold their peer accountable if they start demonstrating that kind of behavior than someone who is 30 years their senior. So yeah, that's definitely a lesson that I took away from that I'll get into a little bit in terms of talking about control as an important strategy. But yeah, so I also saw this too, and I've seen this a lot in the US movement, is when we talk about youth engagement for the past many years, it's been a group of elders getting together to have the conversation, and nothing really comes of it. So I have been the token youth in a room full of elders talking about youth engagement a few times. Nothing has ever come of any of those meetings, and those meetings totally sucked and were really ineffectual. And I think it just really demonstrates that, you know, if we, and I think this goes for other demographics and other identities, but like, if you want to do something for you, and that's the cooperative way, that like you need to be in control and you need to be defining the space and the work. For sure. But so after a couple of years of doing that work, I went on to NASCO. And I am now, to date, the last executive director in their history, because once I'd been there for a while, we as a staff collectivized and unionized through the IWW to be a staff collective. It's something we had kind of dreamed of as an organization for years, but like nobody really knew how to do it, and we still didn't know how to do it, we just did it anyway, and it was a really, really painful process for every single person that was involved, and every single person that was involved had the philosophy and the ideology and the values that thought that this was a good idea. But what it really demonstrates is that it's super hard to break out of power structures that you're accustomed to, even if you don't agree with them. You know, so it's like, that was like, wow, we have so much work to do here and other places. But yeah, well, we were not doing that work. The other stuff that was happening at NASCO that is kind of interesting to the role of youth in the movement is that we were constantly invited and often paid for to come speak at events throughout the cooperative community, because in the US, NASCO for decades was the only place where you could go and find a young person who knew about co-ops. Like, we were it. But that was it was like really fun and great, you're gonna go interesting places. Sometimes there were meetings in Puerto Rico and other kind of stuff. But why that was really problematic is because we were effectively being asked to represent like an entire demographic with one voice, and it was our interpretation, which is problematic because NASCO is not every youth and every student. It's also no longer student specific as of 2006. It does have elders who live in the member co-ops for sure. A lot of its board members don't even live in the co-ops anymore, so it's a very diverse group, except at the same time it's also relatively homogenous in terms of race and class. So coming and speaking as, you know, like the voice of the youth is not really something any group could effectively do. But NASCO was the only game in town with any kind of youth affiliation for decades, so that's why we kept getting called. But in recent years, since the International Year of Cooperatives in 2012, we've seen a resurgence, and also the 99% or Occupy movement. These things have had a direct impact on the resurgence, or a surge, of youth organizing and student organizing in the cooperative movement in the United States. So it's like a really, really awesome time for youth organizing. And something that we for sure have NASCO specifically to thank, who kind of held down that youth space, for better or worse, for decades, is that in the past 10 years in particular, NASCO brought back into the cooperative conversation in the US the role of social justice, and really reinserted it as like, this is fundamental. Like this, we can't do this work without talking about this. Like this work is social justice work. And that wasn't present in the larger scale conversations in the US. So it was definitely the rabble-rousing youth, young people, who have been bringing that issue to the fore, continuing so. But so there's been a surgence of new groups on the scene, and one of those groups is the USA Co-operative Youth Council, and that's my current labor of love in the organization I'm most closely affiliated with these days. And so it's a cross-sector national organization of like 17 to 30-year-olds or what have you. And what we want to create is meaningful participation opportunities through the council in the cooperative movement in the U.S. for young people, and to provide a platform for a bunch of different youth voices to participate in the national conversation. Because our national work and our national trade association, you really have to have an affiliation to get anybody to listen to you. You cannot be an individual and be respected. So we are just kind of like that. Here's your rubber stamp affiliation to go say how you feel in these conversations. A little more nuanced than rubber stamp, but still, empowerment is number one. And believe it or not, youth engagement is not a priority of our trade association. So we really are in many ways kind of going it alone. And so it's tough. It's really tough in the U.S. And if a young person finds out about cooperation, it's usually secondarily, like they're studying alternative economics and then they bump into cooperation. So we have a big problem with only on average 40% of high school graduates every year go to college, and that's where you'd find out about and bump into cooperation. So the majority of the young people in the U.S. are not going to follow the path that's most likely to lead to cooperation. So how do we engage these people? How do we touch those folks? And so that's kind of what the Youth Council wants to do, is to reach all of those folks, but also at the same time, because of the function of university being the way that people find out about co-ops, we still ourselves are really relatively homogenous in terms of race and class. So we're still trying to change that and work towards inclusivity and accessibility, and really that work is never done. So we're going to be doing that for a long, 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 long time. But at its most basic, what the Youth Council wants to do is make it easier for young people to participate in the cooperative movement in the U.S. Because right now it's really hard. There's a colleague of mine who is super educated in cooperative development, wants to do cooperative development, wants a job, just wants to do it, and she can't. She's a barista and does retail stuff, and there's that story is all over, that there are people that are chomping at the bit to do this good work, to do this movement building work, and there just isn't a place or a space for them. So that's why I think the work that Students for Cooperation, the work that all of the myriad groups and all myriad groups in the U.S. are doing, and what we're doing through the International Cooperative Alliance with the Global Youth Network, is the most important work that we're doing right now collectively in the cooperative movement. Legislation, advocacy, all that stuff aside, but I think that youth and the student work is the absolute most important for the future of our movement. And I think it's vital that we appreciate how profound the work that we're doing right now is, and to look towards the future. So this is where we kind of get to the strategies for movement building. So because what we're doing is so profound and really dictates the future of the movement, or can, maybe if we're not that effective it won't, but it could, that there's that potential, we really need to be strategic in how we approach student and youth organizing. So there are 5 points that we're thinking about how best to build power and federate to create movement infrastructure and engagement for young people and students. So that's, number one is by replacing and reforming the cooperative institutions that no longer or maybe never embodied the cooperative identity. Number two, by ensuring that our youth programs and institutions are youth-owned and youth-operated. Number three, by influencing the redistribution of wealth of various kinds within the cooperative movement to support youth work. Number four, by building resilient and inclusive networks of young people. And number five, by building our own financial wealth, so assets, building assets,